They locked the door to face their past, and lost themselves. It was just a cabin, a small, weathered structure tucked so deep in the woods that the world seemed to forget it existed. The trees stood like sentinels, their branches weaving a canopy that swallowed sound, leaving only the faint rustle of leaves and the heavy scent of pine and secrets. They chose this place for that very reason, to hide, not just from the world, but from themselves. From the questions they'd buried deep, the regrets they'd carried like stones in their pockets, the love they'd tried to kill but couldn't. The moment they turned that key, they weren't just locking the door. They were sealing something else, something heavier, something that had been clawing at their hearts for years, refusing to let go, like a ghost that lingered in the corners of their minds. They thought they could face it, unravel it, maybe even bury it for good. But some truths, once spoken, don't let you walk away. They cling to you, like damp air on skin, like the echo of a voice you can't forget, no matter how hard you try. I'm going to tell you about the two of them. About the days they spent in that room, where every word felt like a blade slicing through years of silence, every pause like a wound that refused to heal. About how love can be a cage you build with your own hands, brick by brick, until you're trapped inside with no way out. And how, sometimes, you don't want to escape, even when you know you should. Even when every fiber of your being tells you to run, to leave it all behind, you stay, because the alternative, losing it forever, is worse. What happens when you trap love and regret in one room? When you lock yourself away with the one person who knows you better than anyone, who sees every scar, every secret, and hurts you just as deeply as they love you? Stay with me, because this story, it's going to make you feel something you can't shake. Something that'll linger long after I'm done talking, like a memory you didn't know you had until it's all you can think about. It started with a letter. Not an email, not a text. Those are too fleeting, too easy to swipe away and pretend you never saw. No, this was ink on paper, her handwriting curling into his name like she was carving it into the bark of a tree, each letter deliberate, trembling with intent, as if she'd poured her entire soul into those strokes. Meet me, it said. One last time. He found it slipped under his door, no stamp, no postmark, just her words staring up at him from the floor of his apartment, a silent accusation, a plea, a dare. He left it on his kitchen counter for days, untouched, like a grenade with the pin half pulled, its presence a constant weight in the room. He hadn't seen her in 3 years. Not since the night everything broke, when the world they'd built together shattered into pieces too sharp to pick up, too jagged to piece back together. Her name was Elise. His was Daniel. They'd been everything to each other once. Lovers, confidants, the kind of people who could finish each other's sentences but never needed to because a glance was enough, a brush of fingers, a shared breath in the quiet. They were the couple everyone envied, the ones who made you believe in soulmates, in the kind of love that burns so bright it blinds you to everything else. They'd walk hand in hand through crowded streets, and the world would fade away, leaving just the two of them, wrapped in a warmth that felt invincible. But envy doesn't see the cracks. And their cracks ran deep, hidden beneath the surface, growing wider with every unspoken hurt, every moment they chose silence over truth, every time they turned away instead of facing what was breaking. They'd hurt each other in ways that don't heal, not with apologies, not with time, not with anything as simple as forgiveness. She'd betrayed him with someone else, not out of love but out of anger, a desperate attempt to feel something other than the emptiness he'd left her with, to prove she could still be wanted, still be seen. He'd walked away without a word, leaving her to drown in the silence, to carry the weight of her mistake alone, to wake up every morning with the ghost of his absence beside her. And yet, here was her letter, asking for something impossible, closure. As if closure was a thing you could find in a single conversation, as if it could stitch up wounds that had been bleeding for years, as if it could erase the ache that lived in their bones. The cabin was her idea. A place far from the city, far from the noise of their lives, where no one would interrupt them. No phones, no Wi-Fi, no distractions, just a single room with a fireplace that barely worked, its flames struggling against the damp wood, a creaky wooden floor that groaned under every step, and a door that locked from the inside, heavy and final. "We'll talk," she'd written. We'll face it all. And then we'll let go. He didn't want to go. Every part of him screamed to tear the letter into pieces, to burn it and scatter the ashes, to move on with the life he'd been trying to build without her, a life that felt like a shadow of what it used to be. He'd moved to a new apartment, taken a new job, surrounded himself with new routines, but none of it filled the hole she'd left. At night, when the world was quiet and the city outside his window faded to a hum, he could still hear her voice. The way she'd whisper his name like it was a secret only they shared, soft and reverent, like a prayer. The way her laugh used to fill every empty space in him, like sunlight pouring into a room that had been dark for too long. He'd lie awake, staring at the ceiling, wondering if she still laughed like that, if she still tilted her head the same way when she was lost in thought, if she still wore that old sweater of his when the nights got cold. So he went, not because he believed in closure, but because he couldn't stop wondering what might happen if he did, what it would feel like to see her again, to stand in the same room and breathe the same air. When he arrived, she was already there, standing on the porch, her breath visible in the cold air like a ghost she couldn't shake. She looked older, but not in a way that diminished her. Her hair was shorter, falling just above her shoulders, and her face was softer, etched with lines that hadn't been there before. But her eyes were the same, sharp, searching, like they could see straight through him to the parts he tried to hide, the parts he didn't even admit to himself. You came, she said, her voice soft but heavy, like she hadn't believed he would, like she'd been bracing herself for an empty porch and another unanswered letter. I shouldn't have, he replied, his words clipped, his hands shoved deep in his pockets to keep them from trembling. But he stepped inside anyway, his boots thudding against the worn floorboards, each step echoing in the small space like a heartbeat. The door clicked shut behind them. The lock turned, a sound so final it made his chest tighten, like a noose pulling taut. And just like that, they were alone with everything they tried to leave behind, the love, the pain, the questions that had no answers. The air in the cabin felt thick, like it was holding its breath, waiting for one of them to break the silence, to say the first word that would unravel it all. The first night was quiet. Too quiet. They sat across from each other at a small wooden table, the kind that wobbled if you leaned too hard, its surface scarred with years of use, as if it had witnessed other confessions, other heartbreaks. The fire in the hearth cast shadows that danced like ghosts on the walls, flickering over the rough-hewn beams, making the room feel alive in a way that unnerved them both, like the cabin itself was listening, waiting. They'd agreed to talk, to lay everything bare, to finally say the things they'd swallowed for years, the things that had festered in the dark. But where do you start when the past is a minefield, when every word risks setting off an explosion, when the truth feels like a weight you might not survive? She spoke first, her voice cutting through the silence like a knife, sharp and trembling. I didn't mean to hurt you, she said barely above a whisper, her hands clasped tightly in her lap, her knuckles white. But I did. He didn't look at her. His eyes were fixed on the flames, watching them twist and curl, his jaw so tight it ached. You didn't just hurt me, Elise, he said, his voice low, controlled, but laced with something raw, something that had been buried too long. You broke me. The words hung there, sharp and heavy, like a blade suspended in midair, waiting to fall. She flinched, her shoulders hunching as if she could make herself smaller, as if she could escape the weight of what he'd said. But she didn't look away. Her eyes stayed on him, glistening in the firelight, searching his face for something, forgiveness, understanding, maybe just a sign that he was still there, still reachable. I know, she said, her voice cracking, the words spilling out like they'd been trapped inside her for too long. And I hate myself for it. Every day, I hate myself for it. I wake up and it's there, like a shadow I can't shake. But you left, Daniel. You didn't even give me a chance to explain, to tell you why, to make you see it wasn't what you thought. Explain what? His voice was low, dangerous now, like a storm gathering on the horizon, dark and unpredictable. He leaned forward, his hands gripping the edge of the table, his knuckles as white as hers. That you ran to someone else the moment things got hard? That you threw away everything we had for, what? A moment of revenge? A chance to hurt me back? It wasn't like that, she said, her hands trembling now, her voice rising despite herself, cracking under the weight of her own desperation. I was angry, Daniel. You were shutting me out. You were always so good at that, building walls I couldn't climb, locking me out of your head, your heart. I felt like I was screaming, and you couldn't even hear me. I was drowning, and you were too busy to notice. He laughed, a bitter sound that didn't reach his eyes, that echoed in the small room like a gunshot, sharp and jarring. So it's my fault? You're unbelievable. The air between them crackled, thick with unspoken accusations, with years of hurt that had festered in the dark, growing sharper with time. They were supposed to be here to heal, to find some kind of peace, to put the past to rest. But every word was pulling them deeper into the wound, tearing it open wider, exposing the raw, bleeding edges they both tried to ignore. She reached for his hand, a reflex, her fingers brushing the air between them, but he pulled back like her touch was fire, like it could burn him all over again. Don't, he said, his voice sharp, final, cutting through the air like a blade. Don't act like we're still, whatever we were. But the truth was, they were still something. Even now, with all the pain between them, with all the years and the hurt and the silence, there was a pull, a magnetic, dangerous thing that made the air feel too small, too charged, like the space between them was alive with electricity. He could feel it in the way her eyes lingered on him, searching for something he wasn't sure he could give, something he wasn't sure he had left. He could feel it in the way his heart raced when she leaned closer, her breath warm against the cold, her presence filling the room like a song he couldn't stop hearing, no matter how much he wanted to. They didn't sleep that night. They talked until their voices were hoarse, circling the same questions like vultures over a corpse, picking at the bones of their past. Why did you do it? Why didn't you fight for us? Why does it still hurt so much? Each answer peeled back another layer, exposing raw, ugly truths they'd both tried to bury. She told him about the loneliness she'd felt, how his ambition, his endless hours at work, his drive to be something more, to prove himself to a world that didn't care, had left her feeling invisible, like a ghost in her own life, haunting the edges of his world. He told her about the betrayal, how it had hollowed him out, carved out a piece of him he didn't know how to get back, made him question everything he thought he knew about love, about trust, about himself. By morning they were exhausted, their eyes red, their bodies heavy with the weight of everything they'd said. The cabin felt smaller, like the walls were closing in, pressing them closer together even as they fought to keep their distance, to hold on to the anger that felt safer than the alternative. They'd planned to stay for 3 days, just 3 days to say what needed to be said, to find some kind of ending, some way to walk away without carrying the past with them. But as the sun rose, casting pale light through the frost-covered windows, painting the room in shades of gray, they both knew it wouldn't be enough. Because the more they talked, the more they realized they weren't just confronting the past. They were confronting the fact that they still loved each other. And that was the most dangerous thing of all, the thing that made the air feel heavy, the thing that made every word, every glance, feel like a step towards something they couldn't come back from. The second day was different. The anger was still there, simmering beneath the surface, but it was quieter now, like a storm that had passed but left the air heavy with the promise of rain, the kind that clings to your skin and makes you feel alive and burdened all at once. They didn't sit at the table anymore. It felt too formal, too much like a battlefield, too much like the place where they'd thrown their worst words at each other. Instead, they moved to the floor, closer to the fire, their knees almost touching as they sat cross-legged on a threadbare rug that smelled faintly of dust and time. The space between them felt like a living thing, charged with everything they weren't saying, everything they were afraid to admit, every truth they'd kept locked away even from themselves. She started to open up in a way she hadn't before, her words spilling out like water from a cracked dam, rushing forward, unstoppable. Not just about the betrayal, but about the years before, the quiet moments, the ones they'd taken for granted, the ones that felt like home. The way she'd loved him so fiercely it scared her, how she'd lie awake at night watching him sleep, his chest rising and falling, wondering if she was enough to hold on to someone like him, someone who seemed to carry the weight of the world in his eyes. "I never told you," she said, her voice breaking, her hands twisting in her lap, her fingers tracing invisible patterns on the rug. "I was always afraid you'd see me, all of me, the messy parts, the broken parts, and decide I wasn't worth it. That one day you'd wake up and realize you could do better." He stared at her, his chest so tight it hurt to breathe, like his heart was trying to break free and stay locked away all at once. He wanted to tell her she was wrong, that she'd always been enough, more than enough, that she was the one thing in his life that had ever felt real. But the words wouldn't come, caught in the tangle of his own guilt and pain, the weight of all the ways he'd failed her. Instead, he said, "I thought you were the one who'd leave. You were everything, Elise. Everything I didn't deserve. And I wasn't enough to keep you." The confession hung between them, raw and unguarded, like a wound-laid bear, bleeding and tender. For the first time, they weren't fighting. They weren't throwing accusations or digging up old hurts to use as weapons. They were seeing each other, not the versions they'd built in their heads, the villains they'd made each other into to make the pain easier to bear, but the real, broken people sitting there, scarred by their own choices, by the weight of what they'd lost, by the love they'd let slip through their fingers. She reached for him again, and this time, he didn't pull away. Her fingers brushed his, tentative, like she was afraid he'd disappear if she moved too fast, like he was a dream she might wake up from. The touch was electric, a spark that made them both freeze, their breaths catching in unison, the air between them humming with something unspoken. For a moment, they just sat there, her hand resting on his, the fire crackling softly in the background, the only sound in a world that had gone quiet, as if it was holding its breath for them. "Do you ever think about what we could have been?" she whispered, her voice so soft it was almost swallowed by the flames, barely reaching him but hitting like a wave. "Every day," he admitted, his voice barely audible, like a confession he wasn't sure he wanted to make, like a truth he'd kept locked away even from himself. "And it kills me. Every single day, it kills me." The silence that followed was deafening. It wasn't just the absence of words, it was the weight of everything they still wanted but couldn't have, the love that was still there, tangled up in guilt and regret, pulling them together even as it tore them apart. The life they'd dreamed of, nights in each other's arms, mornings filled with laughter, a future they could touch, could taste, could build together, now just a shadow in a locked room, fading with every word they spoke, every truth they uncovered. They spent hours like that, talking in fragments, their voices soft and hesitant, like they were afraid to break the fragile thing they'd created, this moment where they were finally honest, finally vulnerable. They talked about the little things, the way they used to dance in the kitchen to songs only they could hear, her head against his chest, his hands on her waist, the world outside forgotten. The way he'd leave notes in her coat pocket for her to find on cold mornings, scribbled words like, "You're my home," or, "Don't forget to smile." That made her heart ache with love. The way she'd hum when she was nervous, a melody he could still hear in his dreams, a tune that followed him through every quiet moment since they'd parted. Each memory was a knife, cutting deeper, drawing blood, but they couldn't stop. It was like they were trying to hold on to something that was already slipping away, like sand through their fingers, like water through a sieve. By the third day, the cabin felt like a world of its own, separate from everything else, a universe contained within four walls. The outside didn't exist anymore. There was no city, no jobs, no lives waiting for them beyond the trees, no responsibilities pulling them back. There was just them, the fire, and the truth they couldn't escape, no matter how much they wanted to. They were closer now, physically and emotionally, their bodies inches apart, their words softer, more vulnerable, like they were peeling back the last layers of armor they'd worn for years. But every step toward each other felt like a step towards something forbidden, something they weren't supposed to want, not after everything, not after the pain they'd caused each other, the scars they'd left on each other's hearts. But when she leaned her head against his shoulder, her hair brushing his cheek, her scent, something soft, like lavender and rain, filling his lungs, he didn't move away. It felt like the most natural thing in the world, like coming home after years of wandering, like finding a piece of himself he'd lost. And the most dangerous, like standing at the edge of a cliff, knowing one step could send him falling. Her warmth seeped into him, stirring something he tried to bury, something that made his heart ache with a longing he couldn't name, a longing that felt like it could consume him if he let it. He could feel her breathing, slow and steady, and for a moment, he let himself imagine they could stay like this, locked away, untouchable, safe from the world that had torn them apart, safe from the choices that had broken them. "Do you think we can fix this?" she asked, her voice so small it barely reached him, like a whisper from a dream, fragile and fleeting. He didn't answer. Not because he didn't want to, but because he didn't know. The love was still there, pulsing beneath the surface, warm and alive, but so was the pain, sharp and unrelenting, a reminder of everything they'd done to each other. And he wasn't sure which one was stronger, which one would win if they let it, if they gave in to the pull that was drawing them closer, closer, until the space between them was nothing but a breath. The fourth day came, and with it, the realization that they couldn't stay forever. The world outside was waiting, impatient and unforgiving, its demands creeping through the cracks in the walls, reminding them that time hadn't stopped, even if it felt like it had. The cabin wasn't a home, it was a confession booth, a place to lay their sins bare and hope for absolution, to speak the truths they'd carried for too long. But absolution doesn't come that easily, not when the sins are carved into your heart, not when the person you hurt is the same one you love, the same one whose presence makes you feel whole and broken all at once. They stood by the door, the key in her hand, both of them staring at it like it was a loaded gun, its weight heavy with the finality of what it meant. The metal was cold against her fingers, biting into her skin, a reminder that this moment, this choice, was real. "If we leave," she said, her voice trembling, barely holding together, like a thread about to snap. "It's over. For good." He nodded, his throat so tight he could barely swallow, his chest aching with the weight of her words. "I know." But neither of them moved. The silence stretched, heavy with everything they hadn't said, everything they were too afraid to say. The love they still felt, burning like an ember that refused to die, no matter how much they tried to smother it. The regret that would never fade, no matter how many years passed, no matter how far they ran from each other. The life they could have had, a house filled with laughter, mornings tangled in sheets, promises they'd meant to keep, dreams they'd whispered to each other in the dark, if they'd made different choices, if they'd fought harder, if they'd loved better, if they'd been braver. In the end, it was Daniel who turned the key. The lock clicked, a sound so sharp it cut through the air, echoing in the small space like a gunshot. The door creaked open, letting in a rush of cold air that felt like a slap, waking them from the dream they'd been living for days, pulling them back to a reality they weren't ready to face. They stepped outside, the world too bright, too loud, after days of nothing but each other, nothing but the fire and their voices, the quiet rhythm of their confessions. The trees loomed around them, silent witnesses to their unraveling, their branches swaying in the wind like they were mourning what was lost. The path back to their separate lives stretched out before them, long and unforgiving, like a sentence they couldn't escape. They didn't say goodbye. They didn't need to. The way she looked at him, her eyes glistening with unshed tears, wide and searching, like she was trying to memorize every line of his face. The way he reached for her hand one last time, squeezing it gently, his thumb brushing over her knuckles, a touch that said everything he couldn't. "I love you, I'm sorry, I'll never forget you, even if I want to, even if I spend the rest of my life trying." They walked away in different directions, the cabin shrinking behind them, its walls holding the echoes of their voices, their confessions, their love, like a museum of what could have been. A part of them stayed in that room, locked away with the words they'd spoken, the truths they'd uncovered, the pieces of themselves they'd left behind, the fragments of a love that was too big, too heavy, to carry into the world outside. Some doors, once closed, can never be opened again. Have you ever faced a love you couldn't escape? Tell us below, because I know you've felt it, that ache, that pull, that moment you can't let go of, no matter how much it hurts. And if their story made you feel trapped in your own heart, Share it with someone who'd understand, someone who knows what it's like to love something you can't have, to carry a memory that's both a comfort and a wound. What's a moment you wish you could relive? Comment now, because I'm curious, and I know you are too.